Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'd like to do is kind of go over a summary of how we're going to write the equation of a polynomial when given the zeros. So basically what we need to do when we're given the zeros is we want to write out all the zeros. And that's especially important, especially when we have the conjugate, imaginary conjugate or irrational conjugate. Anytime you have the x equals I or x equals the square root of 3, you also have to include the conjugate, which would be negative I or x equals negative square root of 3. Because remember, when we take the square root, we have plus or minus, right? So you have to make sure you include both of those. Now, the next thing we need to deal with is once we have the conjugate, when we have x equals, we want to set them equal to 0 because those are our zeros, right? These are our solutions. So we set them equal to 0. When we do that, that's what we did with our factors. We took our factors, set them to 0 from the polynomial. So we're going to take, so since we set them equal to 0, we take what's equal to 0, which is now going to be our factors. Then we take our factors, multiply them together, and then we multiply those to produce our equation. So basically, kind of some tips and tricks is, please always remember that the conjugate, is always going to be negative. And this one kind of gets students right here is the I plus 3 and x equals negative I plus 3. Remember, it's I is positive or negative, not the 3. But a lot of times we always have 3 minus I and 3 plus I, right? Because I is afterwards. But if we rearrange them, you want to make sure that you always have the I as the negative term. The next thing is when you're multiplying expressions, especially if you have zeros that look like this, is to use the difference of two squares. And I'm not going to go through a video. I'm not going to go through an example of this, but it's a very good tip and trick to help you out because, yeah, you can multiply them using FOIL, but I like using the difference of two squares to multiply them, which is pretty much grouping your expressions and then applying the difference of two squares. And the videos that have zeros that are like that, you can see where I go over that technique. The common mistakes is, again, forgetting the conjugate. So many students have I, and they just leave that as their 1, 0, as I. Or they're not setting their zeros equal to 0. Remember, that's exactly where our zeros came from. They had like x plus 5 equals 0. Then you solved, right? So you got to set them equal to 0 before you can go to a factors. And the last one is when we're multiplying, a lot of students, just make the mistake. They get all the way to the final end. Everything's correct. And then they make mistakes combining their like terms. So that's basically what I wanted to kind of go over with you guys on that. And I'm glad you made it this far. And if there's any other questions, anything else I can do to help you out, please just let me know. Thanks.